environment. Those are fairly, I guess, easy to point out, but they're so broad it's hard to come up with a quick, sustainable and implementable solution in, what if we give it like 15 minutes? So we chose to focus in on a few issues, and for an environment, we kind of chose particular issues, environmental, economic, and social. For our environmental issue, we chose the issue of water, and especially in regards to, there's the idea, there's privatization of water in Bolivia, which it went from, I guess, equal access for Bolivians to this structure that started to, anyway, everyone needs water to live, and charging unsustainable prices for it, as well as treating it as a commodity when it is in fact an essential part of life, really doesn't, I guess, help the problem. It really starts reducing all life down to dollars and cents, and that's not a sustainable way to look at life. People have intrinsic value, and it can't always be related to their how much money is this person going to make me. Which kind of leads to our next point, our economic issue. We chose to tackle the idea of the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, and the World Bank, and how they don't really lend themselves to sustainable investment practices within the country. Many modern day countries develop their economic policy under, let's say, protected borders. They weren't subject to the absolute ebbs and flow of international capitalism, which existed at the time. But we can look at the case of America. The dominant power when America developed its economy was Great Britain. And Great Britain strongly advocated this lazy capitalism. America stood opposite of this and tried to shelter itself to the world, which allowed a strong development of local and domestic industries. However, with the IMF, what the IMF has been doing is in a lot of developing countries, they've argued for less protection of domestic industries, and this becomes devastated when a major producer like America is exporting its products like corn, milk, and numerous other disposables that Americans take for granted day to day. But in the process of exporting it, they erode the sustainability of domestic industries, so that they're unable to get real economic progress. So really challenging the dominance of the IMF is very, IMF and the World Bank as the, and in my mind it kind of seems like they're pushing ideologies that are kind of hung over from the Cold War, this ultra-right wing, instead of looking at winning the capitalism game, which instead of the human game, sustainability. And our last point is about gender equality. Although we, in North America, and although the majority of just a quick count, looks like the majority of the participants in this forum are male, it's hard to take, it's easy to take for granted the fact that around the world, it's still completely unequal. Like if we look at a range of political theorists from Karl Marx to, I guess, to Friedman, they advocate gender equality. It strongly functions as a way to limit our options. I mean, the fact that in Canada we can look every day is the fact that on average women earn 75 cents for every dollar a man makes. No one can argue that that's a fair practice. That's something that immediately at home we can look into stopping and instituting, and then that we can become a global leader in pushing for women's rights. Calling on the international forum from places like Saudi Arabia, where the legal age of marriage for a woman is 11, which is in no way, which I find personally a little bit disgusting. I just think that's not an appropriate. That's not an appropriate way. It's furthering our own local rights. We can become world leaders and really challenge other countries to rise to that challenge.
Very good. Just a couple comments. Those are three fairly specific areas where I think you're right. These represent huge global challenges. On the water one, you say the privatization of water and not treating it as a commodity. You could also argue that putting a price on it may mean that we use it more responsibly. But the issue, and you mentioned Bolivia as an example, and I want to study that example more because I'm not as aware of it. But the waste of water, and in some ways, I do think maybe perhaps public ownership, but I do think putting a price on water may be important in that people will not use it as indiscriminately as they do, and that's tough. terms of the IMF or World Bank or these Bretton Woods institutions, we've lost a great opportunity in the last 12 months as we reform global governance around financial, after the financial crisis. We could have used this opportunity to reform these institutions to also take into account social progress and environmental responsibility and stewardship. It's not lost completely, but I really want us to be considering those issues, and I think that's a very good consideration. And gender equality, you said saying that multilaterally Canada could be doing more on this. One of the advantages we have as a country is that we're the most diverse in the world in terms of it's a multicultural advantage we have. And that gives us advantages in terms, economic advantages, because we have natural bridges to some of these fast-growing emerging economies in our people. But it also gives us an advantage to make a huge difference, because one of the challenges, you mentioned Saudi Arabia, but there are very different norms, cultural norms, out there in terms of the treatment of women and women's rights. And one of the things that we have to grapple with here in Canada is we've got this policy of multiculturalism that encourages and fosters the notion of every culture comes here and celebrates and maintains its own culture, but there are certain areas whereby what is culturally acceptable in certain countries or with certain people may not be acceptable for us here. And we have a Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which in many ways does advance rights in Canada more so than any other country in the world in certain areas. So maybe we can actually use our multiculturalism and what we do here in Canada to help change cultural norms in people's countries of origin in some ways. If Canada can be a place where women have greater rights and greater freedoms, and that can make a difference right around the world.